Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. First, I want to introduce myself. My name is Soroya, and I use singular they pronouns, they, them, and theirs. And I'm going to be your moderator today for our discussion. And we need a moderator because there's so many people here today, which is so wonderful. We've got students from courses in theater, environmental issues, and computer science from both the University of San Diego and the University of California, San Diego, which is very confusing to my parents. So regardless of whether you're coming from USD, UCSD, or some other P of SD, we want you to be a part of this discussion here today. And we only have until 5:20. So that's why we encourage you all to use the chat function, which is gonna be shared with everybody, but Dr. Monica Stuft is gonna be moderating the chat and then feeding me your questions and your comments so that I can work that into the discussion throughout. But we are gonna have a section at the end, which is gonna be more of a direct Q&A with the students. So we're so honored and excited to have two very special guests with us today, Mayor Dedina of Imperial Beach and Representative Mike Levin. So let's start by giving them a welcoming, a little bit awkward, virtual round of applause. Emojis or actual applause. This is what you get now in Zoom land. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here, you two. So even though we're coming from very different classes, we're all interested in the same question, which is, how can we communicate with people outside of our fields in a way that actually reaches them, especially when it comes to environmental issues? You've seen the agenda for today on the slide. But just for a quick reminder, after introductions, each of our special guests will speak for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to do a discussion between the two of them. That'll be really cool. And then finally, the third portion of the event is a Q&A with the students. And that's when you're going to have a chance to ask your questions either verbally or through the chat. But as a heads up, we are recording this because we'd like to share it with the public, because if we think that they can benefit from it. And so we're going to be giving priority to students that are brave enough to appear in the video by asking their question and turning on their camera, or not turning on your camera, but asking your question. But if you do that, you'll be in the video. Woo, resume builder. But if you'd like to remain anonymous, you can do that and still ask a question by putting it in the chat. And then Dr. Monica Stuft will send that to me, and then I'll ask it for you. All right. So next up, I'm going to ask Dr. Boudria to give us some background on our first special guest, the Mayor of Imperial Beach, Mayor Dedina. Take it away, Dr. B.
Thanks, Soroya. So, we're very happy that we were able to get our two speakers with us today, because it's so important for us to have local connections and real life connections. And so I think that's really the goal of bringing in people who are on the ground and dealing directly with the decisions. And so the first thing I want to say is just thank you both for coming. And so I've actually known Mayor Dedina for a long time. We met at a beach in Baja, which is a great way to make new friends and make new connections. When Serge was still working on many issues in Baja California. You have seen his bio, so I won't go through the details. Why I'm really excited to have him represent both the southern part of San Diego County, but also someone who's on the ground and someone who is very much an environmentalist himself, someone who's a surfer who therefore connects to the world as we are, and someone who has been a very powerful and in a good way, I will say, assertive and aggressive mayor to get things done. And he, I think, is a great representative for the city of Imperial Beach. So I'm going to leave that introduction as short as that, because you've seen his bio, and I will present what he would like to do. Or more formally for you, Mayor Dedina.
Thanks to everybody for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with Congressman Mike Levin, who has been a huge, huge, huge champion of helping us down in IB with the area of Tijuana River talk about that in a second. And then as a UCSD alum, ninth class of 87, stoked to be here with UCSD students. And then very connected to USD because my wife works there. And my buddy, longtime, lifelong IB buddy, Will Guarino, is the cross-country coach at USD and a very good friend of mine. We have been tight since we ran together at junior high. So, and I just saw him and all his runners in Mission Bay, all the USD runners. So anyway, so happy to be here. So let's just get right to the point. It's all about getting things done, right? It's all about having an impact. So if it's about, people like to talk about policy, but if the policy isn't focused, for me, Imperial Beach, 4 square miles, 28,000 people, 30% child poverty rate, one of the lowest income, lowest revenue coastal cities in California, if not the most. I'm not proud of that. We don't have any money, right? Like we're just trying to start a Parks and Rec department. My kids don't have a swimming pool. We're not one of the wealthy, privileged, elite coastal cities that you see in other areas, but we're trying to do a lot more. So for me, it comes down to this. If everything I do needs to have an impact on everybody in Imperial Beach, right? To make sure that I'm addressing issues that basically my constituency, what I'm thinking of is it's a working class family, maybe 2 or 3 kids living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. They're struggling to pay rent. The kids are riding their bikes and skateboard to the beach. The beach is closed. They don't have a rec center to go to. They're going to ride on a street that may not be that safe. So my thing is, if it's not about serving that family, if it's not about serving the senior couple or a senior living on their own in a house that's kind of falling apart, whose biggest joy in life is going to the senior center to play cards in the morning or going to the library for a free program. If it's not about them, or it's not about the business that's struggling on Palm Avenue, then I'm probably not doing my job. I think there's a lot of folks that like to go to a lot of meetings. I can spend all my time going to meetings, but if I go to one more meeting where people spend about time talking about how I have to help them, my whole thing now is, how are you going to help me? Like I'm great to contribute to the regional effort, but I can spend all my time helping everybody else outside of IB. And frankly, my city hasn't changed in 60 years, right? Like 60 years, unpaved roads. We didn't have a grocery store. We didn't have a swimming pool. The beach has been polluted. So I had a lot of work to do. So that's my focus, right? Like, how do you focus on policy? It's tangible, specific things that make the quality of life better for the people, working class and middle class folks in my town who don't have a champion on their side. So what does that mean? It means we came in with an ambitious proposal to do things that make the city more equitable and fair. Before the equitable and equity was a buzzword everyone's throwing around. What does that mean? It means entire swaths of our city didn't have paved alleys, and folks lived in the backs of alleys, including people in wheelchairs, right? So we paved alleys. We made a commitment to paving every alley in the city, and we pretty much did it. We have swaths of the city that don't have sidewalks. We want to put sidewalks in and streetlights. Crosswalks are a huge deal for me. We had entire areas of the city where grandmothers said, we need more crosswalks. We want to cross the street to take our kids to school because people walk, because mom and dad are working 2 or 3 jobs. Then that's what we did. We painted crosswalks. Like one of the best days of being a mayor, and I've been a mayor for 6 years, was literally celebrating an art crosswalk in the east side of IB where I grew up. It's our most child dense area where you see the greatest number of kids living in apartment buildings. It was downzone back in the 60s and 70s. That's where I grew up, surrounded by kids in apartment buildings. They're all my friends. I'm still friends with them. And literally just building a crosswalk. And kids were super stoked, right? Those kids still cross that. I'm obsessed with crosswalks. So for me, it's the big and little things that make a big and little difference in the lives of the residents of my city. So, and that has to do with, so that's the infrastructure part. And then there's the program part, right? And right now, I'll give you an example. During this pandemic, we have had a crisis of well-being and mental health, right? Not only just public health, but mental health. And that means that what's the antidote to that? Well, it's Parks and Rec. It's community building. It's connecting people, right? And so we're super excited. And one of the best things I've posted on Facebook where people are really happy was we're gonna develop a Parks and Rec program. Now in Coronado and other cities, they take that for granted. They have amazing Parks and Rec program. Like I want to copy everything that the city of Coronado does because they have a fantastic Parks and Rec program, and Chula Vista National City always helpful to share us how they do that. They're not going to give us some money to start it. We're starting that. And that's a program that the argument is whatever activity people do, from seniors to our kids, I don't care if it's chess, ballet, skateboarding, BMXing, weightlifting, baseball, soccer, I don't care what it is, music, get them engaged, get them connected. That's democracy building, that's community, that's mental health, right? Like that's everything. And people have been missing that. So I'm really, and I get to the policy stuff and the big picture stuff. Tijuana River, our beaches have been polluted nonstop, 300 days last year for the southern end of our beach because of the Tijuana River crisis. Congressman Levin has been a huge champion of that, making specific things that have helped us to get money to fix that problem. But you know, I'm spend 90% of my time on that. You know, I've engaged everyone from the governor of Baja to the governor of California. I've been to the White House. I've met with the president of Mexico to deal with that. Like it takes all my effort. It's actually pretty exhausting because I want to spend my time surfing waves that you see behind me, perfect hurricane surf, and our beach is closed right now. And then when it comes to issues like climate, and people love to talk about climate change and climate equity and climate justice, but for me, it gets down to specific tangible things. So we did a study that showed that 30% of our town will be impacted by coastal flooding, right? And so what we have done is come up with a plan to start addressing the infrastructure that needs to be moved, right? And so for me, that's a climate change piece. It's climate change is happening. We've documented the science. We have scientists from Scripps Institution of Oceanography doing a lot of the monitoring, which is awesome. We've partnered with them on that. And then the question is now is where do we get the money to actually start addressing the adaptation needs, right? Like how do we move our stormwater infrastructure? How do we move our wastewater infrastructure? And that's where the policy piece comes in. And that's where like, then you have to start working upward. Like how do you work with your state legislators and people in Sacramento to make sure that the climate bond or the climate policies address social equity, right? And addressing cities like mine that don't have any money, right? Like that key piece is the really important policy piece to make sure that you're moving up the chain to get policies that focus on your needs and specific tangible things that will help a small city. And then that's the other equation when you're talking to someone like Congressman Levin or his colleagues, you know, Sarah Jacobs or Scott Peters or Juan Vargas or our senators, Senator Feinstein, for example, is then you have a specific problem like the Tijuana River or climate, and then you put it in a way that you say, okay, well, can we get this? Can we help you guys pass a bill, right? Or can this bill include this mechanism that will help our city? Folks like Mike Levin have been really good at figuring out how to use the policy system, this vast arena of policy to actually help us get money. And then in California, we've got some great legislators who do the same thing. Tony Atkins has come out with a climate bill, a climate adaptation bill, a sea level rise bill that would address issues of equity, right? Senator Atkins is a genius when it comes to policy. Like I've been lucky to work with some folks that are really good at understanding that. And I'm going to give credit to Mike Levin. We got some money out of the free trade agreement. And it was really Congressman Levin that really helped specifically come up with, I think, really work with our congressional delegation to make sure that mechanism could fund Tijuana River stuff. And that was a huge, robust coalition, the San Diego Chamber of Commerce and others. So I think that's the key on the policy front. And I've had as a conservationist, been able to work at the state level as well. And to really see the effective people, again, can take policy, someone like Tony Atkins, who represents San Diego, and then figure out how to make it and really to benefit and have a direct impact on people's lives, right? And like, it's not paper policy, it's actually direct policy. And then I just want to talking about how do you engage with people, you know, it's everywhere, but if you're not on the street, I'm, you know, in a working class community, you know, like I talk to guys at the car wash, I talk to people at the grocery store. Our grocery outlet is like, it's like the town square, right? And people come up to me right up to my face, man, they want to talk, they want to engage. The mayor's shopping, great, let's chat. I'm at the beach, people want to chat and they want to get close and they want to talk it out. They don't want to do it on Facebook or social media. They don't want to email, they don't want to text, they want to talk. And that's really, really important. So you gotta have your finger on the pulse all the time. And that's been hard in the pandemic because I think the issues of, you know, making sure you don't get sick and stuff have been hard, but it's really about face-to-face. And then finally, I will, you know, face engagement, the constituencies, how do you obstacles? Look, it's been a tough, you know, are we talking to Congressman Levin about what happened on January 6th, right? We've gone through the last 4 years have been tough. There's been a lot of polarization and you just got to talk it out. We've realized that having big meetings are a waste of time. if you get involved in government, if you're having meetings that are more than 10 people, it's a waste of time. Like, you need to have meetings with small groups of people. Michelle knows this because you worked on climate change. In fact, Dr. Boudreas was really one of the first people to really address this issue of communicating on climate change, right? And I learned a lot from that study, so thank you. Really, you need small groups of people. You need engaged groups of people. You need to have one-on-ones, two-on-twos, just small meetings. We've started meeting on climate change, talk about that stuff, and it just takes being an honest broker and good faith efforts. But it's not easy. It's not easy in this polarized way. And the other way to do is to avoid getting in fights on Facebook and social media. It's an absolute waste of time. I try to be as positive as possible. I write a bi-weekly column in the local newspaper, weekly newspaper. I'm trying to be in the media, and I'm trying to be positive and just give people sort of like, here's where we're going. I'm not trying to be mean. Like, I think it's really, really important right now to be positive and give people hope and talk about where we're going and why we're going there and how we can get there. It's really critical. It's like being in the barrel, the guy in the barrel right there. He's just going. He may not make it out, but you know what? He's going. And that's, at some point, you have to take off. You have to paddle in, you have to take off, and you have to go, and you may not make it, but it's okay. And I think that's where we're at right now. When we went through this pandemic, we didn't know where we were going, but we gave people hope. We told people the truth about it's going to be tough. We said we will get out of this, but you will be challenged. And now it's been great to talk about, okay, hold on. We are going to get through this, and things will get better. So I'll end there. And I just want to say that I've learned a lot by working with people. Like, I observe acutely when I go to Washington and watch people like Congressman Levin and his colleagues. I listen and I really observe how they get things done, because it's really, really important. And then I'm going to shout out to the San Diego Chamber of Commerce. They have these annual trips to Washington, and that's been like an exercise in policy making and understanding how to get things done. It's been very helpful. And that's how you communicate with industry and business, by really spending time with folks, right? And being honest about what you need and what you expect if they come to your town. So I'll end there.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor Dedina. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Porter for him to introduce Congressman Levin.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Mike Levin. And we've sent out the bios, but I just wanted to say that he represents California's 49th Congressional District, which includes North San Diego County, and South Orange County. It includes UC San Diego, and it's just up the road from University of San Diego. He's a graduate of Stanford University and Duke School of Law. I won't read the whole bio, but I do want to just emphasize the fact that prior to joining Congress, he was an attorney focused on energy and environmental issues, and it was involved in sustainable energy, especially co-founding the Sustain OC that's related to sustainable power generation. So it's our great pleasure to have him here, and I will turn it over to him right now.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. It is great to be with you. I am really grateful to the faculty and the students of both UCSD and USD, and grateful to Soroya for bringing us all together as well. And whether you're a Triton or a Torero, I'm really honored to be here with you. And what an eclectic and interesting group of classes to come together with computer science, engineering, environmental science, and theater. And I absolutely love it. I think it's a great microcosm of the types of things that you need to emphasize when you're working on, environmental policy. It's great to see my friend Serge Dedina. He has been just an incredible leader in IB. I don't think they could have a better mayor. Somebody who has just been a tremendous advocate, whether it be TRV or all the other issues that he just expressed. And it's really a pleasure to get to work with him. And we're going to have a lot more work to do, as we'll discuss. But, as Dr. Porter said, before coming to Congress, I was involved in clean energy, working as an environmental attorney and in the clean tech world. And I loved that work, but also saw a need for leadership in our region, and decided to run in the 2018 election. And I have had an amazing 3 years now, a little over 2 years, getting on 3 years in Congress. I think one of the keys to success, whether it's as a mayor or in Congress, is you have a great team. and you hire really outstanding people. And I've got one with me in Shannon Bradley, who is here. Shannon actually worked at UCSD for, I think, 25 years before joining our team, and just does a phenomenal job with so many different things. Our casework, so important. Also, the stuff that you don't necessarily see in the newspaper, or you certainly won't see if you're just watching cable news, is all the work that our offices do with regard to just basic blocking and tackling on constituent casework, whether it be immigration issues or veterans issues or Social Security or whatever federal issues our constituents have. And Shannon just knocks it out of the park with our constituent casework. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I thought I would briefly share with you the committees that I serve on, because the work that we do in Congress, a lot of it happens in the committees where we serve. And in fact, you might hear this member or that, well, they, took away their committee assignments. Well, that's basically the bulk of what you do in Congress. So if you want to serve in Congress and you don't sit on committees, it's kind of hard to do an effective job of that. So I serve on 3 committees: the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, the House Natural Resources Committee, and specifically on natural resources, I sit on 2 subcommittees: water, oceans, and wildlife, pretty important for our region, and energy and mineral resources. I should also tell you before I get into that, the district where I serve basically is Orange and San Diego counties with Camp Pendleton in between. So it runs all the way up to Dana Point Harbor, if you all know where that is, and all the way down to a little bit of La Jolla, but the campus of UCSD, and then has all of North County in there. So Oceanside, Carlsbad Vista, Encinitas, Solana Beach, Rancho Santa Fe, on down to UCSD. I think it's the most beautiful district in America. I'm biased, but what can I say? So I mentioned natural resources and climate. I also sit on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Our district has one of the highest numbers of veterans and military families of any in the United States. And I was really grateful that even though as a freshman, you're typically not given a gavel or a chair role of anything, I got a gavel on the Veterans Affairs Committee for a subcommittee that I still chair for Veterans Economic Opportunity. So how we use the GI Bill to get veterans the education that they need. Veterans housing, veteran homelessness is a huge challenge. Ending veteran homelessness is a key goal of mine. Obviously, if there are veterans here, we thank you so much for all the service that you've provided. That has been a great bipartisan committee as well. So a lot of times you hear everything in Congress is dysfunctional and broken and no one works together. But in fact, we work together all the time with our colleagues across the aisle. Perhaps there's no greater example of that than the House Veterans Affairs Committee, where we've gotten a lot done on a bipartisan basis and continue to, particularly during this pandemic. I thought I would talk a bit about some of the issues specific to our district and our region. Mayor Dedina brought up the Tijuana River Valley, and I think we'll have some time for back and forth to talk specifically about that. So I'll punt on that for now, other than to say it's a really, really important issue that impacts not just the southern part of San Diego County, but all of San Diego County. In fact, all of Southern California. There were some great researchers at UCSD and Scripps Institution that they put some dye in the water, benign, non-toxic, down at the very southern end of San Diego County. And we watched as the water quality impact, as that dye was seen all the way up the Southern California coast. The point being is if there is a water quality problem in IB, there's also a water quality problem in Coronado and La Jolla and Carlsbad and Oceanside, and probably all the way up to Los Angeles to a certain degree. So when Serge talks about water quality issues in IB, I see water quality issues all up and down the Southern California coast. And the only way we're going to fix them is if we all work together and put our collective will behind that. The other big environmental challenges that we face in our district, one is, and this is something that the whole Southern California coast is dealing with, arguably the whole California coast, which is coastal erosion, bluff collapse, basically the big challenges that we'll be facing over the next decades with regard to climate change and the new normal when it comes to weather events. And we just have to be resilient, and coastal resilience and adaptation, climate adaptation is really a huge area where we're going to be working with the Biden administration in the coming years, hopefully through this American Jobs Plan, which you may have heard about. So there's a huge new infrastructure bill that we're working on called the American Jobs Plan. Happy to discuss more about that. But it's about a $2.25 trillion with a T, $1 trillion bill that would address everything from drinking water to the electric grid to our roads, our bridges, transit, you name it. And it's a huge undertaking, but it is so overdue. When you look at the United States, we are only 13th in the world when it comes to investing in our physical infrastructure. And the Civil Engineering Association, I think, gave us a C- in the most recent report. And that's obviously something that historically has been a competitive advantage of our country. And we need to, as the president would say, build back better and also put a ton of people to work in the process. Another huge local environmental issue that maybe you don't think about as much being at USD or UCSD is San Onofre and the nuclear fuel, the spent nuclear fuel from the San Onofre nuclear generating station. You probably, if you're familiar with that, if you've surfed up there, I say up there, for me, it's slightly down there. I'm just up the way from there. I live about 9 minutes away or 11 minutes away from that plant. And it was shut down in 2011, and they've been in the process of decommissioning the plant. But the waste is still there, about 1,600 tons of spent nuclear fuel. And it's 100 feet away from the Pacific Ocean. There are earthquake faults pretty close. And then there are about 9 million people within 50 miles of the plant, including all of Serge's constituents and my constituents. And what makes that site so unique, not in a good way, is that with all the people and the earthquake faults, it is just a big environmental hazard, a mess waiting to happen. And so my objective is to get that waste off our coast as quickly and as safely as we possibly can. We convened a task force of stakeholders to do it. We came out with a 70-page report on all the steps we're taking, and we're now following through aggressively on all of those steps. In fact, spoke this morning with our new Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, about this very issue. So I'm really excited that hopefully we'll see some momentum behind getting the waste off our coast. And we have to have somewhere to send it to. So it's really the symptom of a greater problem. The greater problem is there's nowhere to send the waste. And so, we can get into that if you're interested during the discussion. The other thing I will mention to you, I think a real key, and I think that Serge would back me up on this, last thing I'll say, is that I think being accountable and being accessible is key to doing this job effectively. Representative is not just my job title, it's also my job description. And if I'm not meeting with people in person, hopefully back in 3 dimensions very soon, but at least through things like this or whatever means I can. If you're not connected to the people that you're trying to represent, you can't do a very good job. And the other thing is we represent a lot more people than the number that voted for us, right? So in my district, I think I got around 205,000 votes this last time, but there are 715,000 people. So there's another, 180 or 190,000 people that voted for somebody else. And then there's like another huge group of people didn't vote at all. And if I'm going to do my job well, I represent everybody. And that means you have to be out there proactively in the community trying to solicit as much feedback and guidance and priorities as possible. So with that, I'm really excited to be with you all. I want to get to as much student discussion as possible, but I know that you want for Serge and myself to speak a bit. Is that right, Soroya?
Yes, that's right. So that brings us to the next portion of our event here, which is going to be a discussion. Now, we had thought of a prompt in advance, which was focused on the differences between the different levels of government. But after hearing from you both in the last 40 minutes, I'm hearing from you that you are more inclined to talk about the connection between the local, state, and federal levels and how those intersect and work together in order to get policy done, and not just the intersection and connection in government, but also in the land. The fact that we are all connected physically through our land and through our environmental systems. And so something like the Tijuana River estuary pollution issue or the San Onofre pollution issue is going to affect not just the people in those areas. Am I hearing you right, that that's kind of the discussion that you're interested in having?
Well, you're totally right. And, I think that, a lot of what I try to do is to listen to local stakeholders about their needs, their concerns, their priorities. And so, for example, the issue of Tijuana River Valley pollution is something that has, obviously been a concern of Serge's, of Mayor Dedina's, for 20 plus years, and something that I first heard about, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, where I probably read about it in the news. And, it's been a real challenge all these years, but we would not be where we are if not for Mayor Dedina, and if not for, I know Supervisor Cox worked at it for many, many years. But the way I see it, you have to be, sometimes we hear the word opportunistic and we think of it, in a negative context. But in politics, a lot of times you have to be opportunistic. So you have a challenge, and then, you see a window where you might be able to use whatever leverage you have. And in the case of TRV, we had this trade deal, and, the trade deal between the US, Canada, and Mexico. And basically, we asked for much tougher labor standards, environmental standards, and a deal that would benefit American workers. But I give great credit to my team, because extremely early in the process, as soon as we heard about USMCA, we connected the dots. And I give great credit to Robbie Fairwell on my staff in DC, because he said, a lot of my colleagues, they wanted to jump out in front on support or opposition to the USMCA. And we needed every vote, to pass the USMCA in the House. And we decided to hold out. And, as we held out, I remember going to Juan Vargas and saying, this is our chance. This is our chance. And, so we held out. We didn't sign on any letters. We kept our cards very close. But throughout, we said the number one thing that we want is money to clean up TRV. And, I give great credit to Serge. I'll give credit to the former mayor, Kevin Faulkner.
Yep.
It was a bipartisan deal. We needed the Trump administration to agree. I don't think the former president was actively engaged. However, I think that the former mayor Faulkner was. I give great credit to Senator Feinstein as well, and her whole team. And it was helpful that my legislative director used to work for Senator Feinstein, so those conversations were being had. But preparation meets opportunity, and you throw a little bit of luck in, and that's how it went down. I found out that we got the money on the flight back. So I went with the speaker to Madrid in, I guess, November of 2019 to the climate conference, the UN climate conference. And on the way back, I was exhausted. I was totally wiped out. And she was negotiating with Lighthizer, the trade representative at the time, on the plane back. And then, she came to the back of the plane. Being a freshman, I was in the cheap seats. And she said, "Is this okay?" And she pointed to her list, and it was $300 million for the Tijuana River Valley. And it was really important to us that it go through the Border Water Infrastructure Program, because we wanted to make sure that we actually could hold a single government entity to account. In this point, in this context, the EPA. But I don't know. That's pretty much what's going on. Where EPA just a couple days ago, or yesterday, I guess, they came out with their first public notice. They're actually going to do something, which is nice. It's
Wait, I didn't even know that. Oh, I'm the last. I'm always the last to know. That's awesome.
Oh man, you got to. Yeah. We'll talk after. They came out yesterday.
Is this
All
like
right.
one of those videos where you tell me good news and I start crying?
No. Well, it's hopefully you'll appreciate what they did, Serge. It's basically the NEPA process is starting, and whether we think that's good or bad, it has to be, right. And it's probably 18 months instead of 18 years to wait. But the point being is that hopefully we'll be able to start actual construction of this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well, I first thank you, and I think you've been really humble about your role in this, because I know you were a badass and that you were pushing. I'm gonna use that language, but I know that's what I heard, but also because I think you were at that point, just for all you guys know, this is not easy work. And I was struck by something. You talked about the issues, Mike. Let's just go through them. 3 big issues in your district: nuclear waste, the railroad between San Diego and LA falling apart, the tracks falling in the ocean in Del Mar, and then ocean pollution, Tijuana River. 3 of the most challenging things. You didn't decide to take on the easy stuff, and you didn't have to do Tijuana River. I want to make this clear to everybody. You chose to, you made a decision to take on the toughest issue that wasn't in your district. And I appreciate that. And I think what I didn't mention, you mentioned your team, because you're obviously a great supervisor and a boss. I didn't mention the fact that, none of this is possible without that robust team. And you mentioned former Mayor Faulkner, now it's Mayor Gloria. But right, the role of former Supervisor Cox, a Republican, and Kevin Faulkner. And I was in the room with those guys, right? And there was no ideology, there was no politics. It was just, how do we get this done? And how do we all use our contacts to our advantage? Kevin going off to the White House. We went to the White House together. He went back, apparently, after the meeting.
You went on 60 Minutes. That a lot of people saw. Minutes. A lot of people, and I shared that video far and wide with a lot of people.
And, Trump did tweet 2 tweets about the Tijuana River after we got on Fox News. I put the story on Fox News, which was good. The president tweeted it. We worked with the Border Patrol. We worked with the Navy. We made sure that we focused on Navy SEALs. But I think what's important to me, Mike, is that we had that team going. At that point, I was exhausted. I didn't know what to do. And what's just great about the teamwork approach, and I think the San Diego teamwork, is that you have a robust congressional delegation. You and Scott Peters and Juan Vargas. You guys are tight. You work together well. Susan Davis, right, who has a strong connection with the military, a great relationship with Senator Feinstein, who's been committed to this from the beginning. And then you guys are interacting with our San Diego Chamber of Commerce, Kevin Faulkner, Greg Cox, and others. And so I just get to be a fly on the wall, and I get to be the guy in the news, right? But at the end of the day, the hard work. No, and I think it's really important. The policy.
Man. No, you worked really hard at this for a long time.
But I am fascinated by those conversations that happen and how you push things forward. And I think that's important.
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple more behind the scenes. And a little bit of it got reported on, like the UT and the LA Times wrote a few stories. But in Congress, you have to figure out who has the relevant subcommittee jurisdiction. And in this case, it was Earl Blumenauer and Jimmy Gomez were really key. Earl is a representative from Portland, and Jimmy represents LA. The speaker put together a group of 8 members to negotiate the USMCA, or to be the congressional representatives negotiating the USMCA trade deal. And for environmental, she had Blumenauer, and Gomez was also part of that group for labor. And so what helped us is that both of them visited, because as you know, if you go down and you see the Tijuana River Valley and you actually get the tour, and I was very fortunate to get to do that as well, they came back and they said, wow, we really have to do something here. This is unacceptable. And having them on the ground actually seeing it was huge. And for all the theater students here, a lot of it is being able to tell a cohesive story. And, Serge did a great job on 60 Minutes, and, no exaggeration, more people saw that 60 Minutes in Washington than Serge may know. But, all of a sudden people really, they said, oh yeah, we saw that 60 Minutes piece on that, so we know what's going on. And then I give a lot of credit to the local media, including, outlets that aren't always the greatest, like KUSI and others that really focused on this. And to their great credit, Dan Plant at KUSI, he's done great reporting on this. And that all really helps. A lot of what we do, we respond to the public sentiment. Public sentiment is really critical. With public sentiment on your side, you get almost anything done. Without it, it's almost impossible to get things done. So now we have to make sure that the EPA under the Biden administration follows through. We got $300 million allocated. The other thing is we had to make sure that we kept the money, that it didn't go to any other border states. And so we thought the best way to do that, because we need all 300 million. We need more than that for the ongoing operations and maintenance of whatever we decide to build or whatever you all decide to build. And I didn't want to see the money going to Texas or any other states. And so we have a lot of work ahead. And during the construction and the rollout, we have to obviously make sure that whatever is built is effective. There's also an ongoing debate over how much should be built on the US side, how much should be built on the Mexican side, how much should the US be responsible for operations and maintenance, how much should Mexico be responsible for operations and maintenance. So those are things that we're going to have to work out.
Mike, the other thing, I think if we have time, Michelle, I'm the chair of the Shoreline Preservation Committee at SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments, which oversees beachfront, beach kind of replenishment and coastal protection projects in your district, as well as mine along San Diego County. And I think you did mention the Del Mar train tracks issue and coastal bluffs, which is, again, one of those issues that's every level of government. It's the city of Del Mar, those council members and mayors are friends of mine. I know Del Mar very well, just like you do. We've got potential federal investments going to be made in North County and sand replenishment. But that's one of those issues that touches every level of government, right? It's the city of Del Mar, it's SANDAG, it's the county of San Diego, the city of San Diego, it's Amtrak, it's the state of California, and obviously it's at your desk as well. Maybe you could talk to me through that. Like, we got literally tracks, the cliffs crumbling. We could interrupt this train line right between San Diego and LA that carries huge amounts of not only passengers, but
it's a huge amount of passengers. It's $1 billion plus a year in commerce. So very important. BNSF has that private long-term agreement to run the commercial aspects of it. It's owned by and large by North County Transit District. So they run the coaster, the Surfliner, and the Metrolink. All are important to our regional economy. And then, of course, it's also part of STRACnet. So it's part of the military connection between the bases, and they see it as a strategic rail line. So, the big challenge is that we keep throwing Band-Aids on something, which we have to, right? Because you don't want to shut down the rail line for a year, because again, it'll cost you $1 billion or more, plus all the displacement of passenger travel, and then the problems around the strategic corridor. So you have to keep it going, and to keep it going, you have to be throwing tens of millions of dollars a year and we do that. We work with the Army Corps of Engineers. We prioritize those Band-Aids are really important, until we figure out a long-term strategy. There's a lot of debate over what to do long-term. What I try to do, going back to what we said earlier, is I try to work with the appropriate agencies, in this case, SANDAG, NCTD, and the cities, and say, okay, what is your long-term game plan? And what do you want me to advocate for at the federal level? And, by and large, they want to move the tracks inland, at least the portion of the tracks inland near the 5 freeway. And that will take a lot of money. And if we want to do that, we have to, again, as we were with the TRV, we have to be opportunistic in the sense that we have to look for that window. Turns out that window is right now.
All right.
So, in the American Jobs Plan, there is, in fact, I'll read exactly, the Washington Post did this great graphic of what's in this thing, but you've got 85 billion for public transit, 80 billion for passenger and freight rail, and 50 billion for infrastructure resilience, right? So any of those pots of money would be a perfect fit for the rail corridor. We figure we need around 3 billion, a lot of money. But when you're talking about, a pot of 2.25 trillion, then all of a sudden, it's not crazy anymore. So that's what we're going to be advocating for. There are 3 major infrastructure projects in San Diego County right now that we're going to try to prioritize, and hopefully we can get wins on one or 2 or 3 of them. The first is the rail corridor, Low Sand Rail Corridor. The second is the Otay Mesa 2. So that, expanding the operations at the port of entry, at the border, huge from an economic perspective. And Serge, I think you've done a lot of the work on that as part of Sandag, if I remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those projects where it's infrastructure, it's economic development, it's good on climate because it's going to reduce emissions on the border, and it's good for quality of life. It's a triple win. I think that's what you've been good at as well, identifying these investment projects and infrastructure projects that hit all 3 things and help us make us more resilient, right?
Exactly. Same can be said for the rail corridor, in terms of reducing reliance on, internal combustion vehicles and eventually we're going to electrify a lot. But the third is the Navwar site, which is near the airport. Sandag's vision is to turn it into a grand central station of the West, where anybody from anywhere in San Diego County or even outside of San Diego County could take transit to get to the airport, which would be amazing. I would do it every week if I could. But Soroya, I see you there. So I assume that means we need to get some students
All
involved.
right. Yeah, I think it's
What
time.
I want to do too.
The moment we've all been looking forward to is hearing from the students. And so students, this is your opportunity to get to be in this recording of this awesome conversation and ask your question, because we're going to give priority to the students that are willing to do that, because we think it's really important to hear your voices and that the public will really benefit from that just as much as any of these other wonderful voices that we got to hear from today. So if you would like to ask your question, please raise your blue hand or whatever color it is. I think you can change the color. And then Dr. Monica is going to let me know who's first up with the first question. I know we have a couple people that submitted in the chat already, but if you are willing and would like to ask your question, please raise your blue hand and then I won't have to ask it for you. So we'll just give you a moment to do that.
Don't be shy. We don't bite. Direct all difficult questions to Serge.
Exactly.
All right, do we have any blue hands yet? I'm gonna give it a few more moments. A moment is so much longer in Zoom. I'm a theater artist. Oh, we've got one. And a second in theater is 30 seconds. It feels like. All right, let's get our first question asker. And that's going to be Daniel Long. Daniel, go ahead and turn on your mic and your camera.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, yep. I hear you.
Daniel.
I'll try and turn on my camera. Hi, thank you.
See your face. Hi.
I'd just like to mimic one of the questions in the chat because I also find it really important to me. This is from Sophia Austin. And this is specifically a question for Representative Mike Levin. How will you work to ensure that the nuclear waste from songs does not disproportionately impact people of color and already marginalized communities? And a follow-up to that is, will Indigenous people's land be taken into account?
Daniel, it's an excellent question and something that we think a lot about. There has been a real neglect of environmental justice concerns around spent nuclear fuel for decades. And, if you go back into the history, there is a great report out of Columbia University that you can read if you're really interested in the weeds of this by Matt Bowen. And Dr. Bowen's work basically will outline the reasons why certain sites were picked. Basically, the weakest politically at the time was the state of Nevada. In 1982 through 1987, when the Nuclear Waste Policy Act was being drafted and implemented, they went from 9 sites to 2 to 1, and the one that they picked was Yucca Mountain in Nevada to basically take all of the nation's nuclear waste. And you're right, there were obvious tribal problems and other problems too, water quality and other problems with Yucca Mountain. I can tell you that the public spent $16 billion of money, taxpayer money, on Yucca Mountain in Nevada, and it's storing exactly 0 nuclear waste. I went and visited, Scott Peters and I went and visited, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago. And it's really a incredible engineering feat, what they did. They drilled 5 miles worth of tunnels below the ground, but it's obviously run into huge political obstacles. So I guess the question is, where can you store spent nuclear fuel where you can achieve some form of consent? Consent meaning you have a community-driven process where you're taking into account things like tribal sovereignty, things like environmental justice and equity. And the good news is that the Obama administration drafted a blue ribbon report about what that would look like. The bad news is that it was drafted fairly late during President Obama's second term, and the Trump administration, I don't think, ever picked it up or bothered to read it. You know, the Trump administration, at first, they were pro Yucca Mountain, and then Sheldon Adelson, the late casino magnate, said, you know, we don't really want all the nation's nuclear waste near my casinos. And so the Trump administration then immediately did a 180-degree and said, never mind, the people of Nevada have spoken. So that sort of left us in square one. The other thing to mention is that in addition to a permanent geologic repository where presumably you'd store waste for 10,000 years, that takes time to actually create, right? To deploy and to prepare a site. Like Yucca Mountain took 30 or 40 years, and you know, other sites take a long time. So in the interim, the idea is you'd have consolidated interim storage. And the problem there is that none of the places that you might be willing to store the waste on an interim basis, they don't want to become the de facto permanent repository for nuclear waste in the absence of any permanent site moving forward. So even like Greg Abbott in Texas, who I disagree with on just about everything, he said, you know, we really don't want this waste in Texas right now. And, you know, in New Mexico, the state of New Mexico just sued Holtec, one of the companies that wants to build an interim storage site. So what this will require is a fresh, new series of meetings with stakeholders and engagement to try to develop some form of path forward. And as Serge said, it's not easy. It's not easy. But if you want to know why we can't move the waste, it's because there's nowhere to move it to. But that doesn't mean we turn our back on hard problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And looks like we have our second question coming from Jacinth Gudetti. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. You can correct me now.
I think you said it right. Thank you. This is for both Representative Mike Levin and Serge Dedina. This is something that's probably not very popular with most people, but currently I'm a car enthusiast and I love modifying cars, and I feel like we've been kind of forgotten about with regards to talks about emissions. And this specifically has to deal with the RPM Act and the EPA's current interpretation of the word race car. So as a car enthusiast myself, I'm planning on turning my current car later on into a competition-only vehicle. However, under the EPA's current interpretation, I cannot legally do that. The EPA currently interprets race car as specifically a car that was never ever registered for street use in the first place. And this would easily wipe out at least 80% of all current race cars, because most amateur racers base their cars off of former street cars. And currently with this legislation, I would be really hampered in what I can do with my car and how I can feasibly participate in motorsport. Because under this current regulation, the only way for me to do so would be to buy a brand new race car that's easily far past my budget. And race cars typically cost 2 to 3 times more expensive, are 2 to 3 times more expensive than converting a street car for race purposes. So I would like to ask, how would you help us continue our hobby that honestly is so niche that doesn't have much environmental impact? And how would the EPA go about redefining these rules?
Mike, you may know something about this. I don't. Sorry. I just want to make sure. Where are you racing at?
Racing?
Yeah, where do you race at?
In legal racetracks, like Laguna Seca, Buttonwillow Raceway. Legal racetracks, we don't do anything on the street, trust me.
I'm just interested in it. Yeah.
Not through your streets and IB, Serge, don't worry.
No, I'm interested in it. I grew up attending motorcycle races with my neighbors in IB. So, you know, we got guys in IB that race cars. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but Mike, maybe you know something about this. Sorry.
Well, look, you know, I think the problem are the defeat devices. So I do know the Union of Concerned Scientists and others have been very aggressive on this. I'd be happy to speak with you more about it. I am, you know, an unabashed car enthusiast like you, but I am also an unabashed electric car enthusiast. And if you want to race, we can, you know, safely, legally, we'll see how some of the electric cars do. But what I would say is that to the extent that the Federal Clean Air Act in the Trump years was under constant assault, and where I grew up, I don't know where you grew up. I grew up in Southern California. We had constant smog alerts. I don't know if Serge did in IB, but I can tell you that I definitely did. I remember growing up in the 80s and you couldn't even run, you couldn't run a lap around the track without your lungs burning because of the smog. Sometimes in grade school, we couldn't even go outside. You'd have days where we'd have to be stuck inside of our classes. I just don't want to go back there. And so, you know, the way I look at it, there ought to be a way that we can work with the aftermarket enthusiasts. And, you know, what I don't like are people that use defeat devices to, you know, have gigantic plumes of coal smoke coming out of the back of their trucks or other vehicles. So there ought to be a way we can work together. I do think it's important when we talk about converting the fleet to electric cars, you can keep your car, right? If you have a classic car or you have, you know, a hobbyist car, enthusiast car, you can keep that vehicle so long as it's compliant and you're getting it smog checked and things like that. So, you know, I'd like to think we could work together. And Shannon, if you want to get, is it Jacinth? Did I get that right?
Jacinth, yeah. Yeah,
Jacinth. If you want to get his contact and we can follow up.
Yeah, I like Mike, if you grew up in Southern California, you like cars. I never had a cool car. You know, I always had an old car. But we got car shows in IB. Like we got the VW guys and then all the car restorers. They're not as cool as the racers, right? But anyway, I was really interested by The Long Road Up. If you haven't seen it, it's on Apple TV about Ewan McGregor. Have you seen that, Mike? It's about
I know what it is, though. It's on my list. But unfortunately, my 8-year-old and 7-year-old dominate our TV viewing, and it's usually, you know, something on Disney Plus.
Well, they got electric Harley Davidsons and then these electric trucks that they're driving up South America. But I think the future in racing and automobiles, and I think the auto manufacturers are going that way, is electric. So I think there's an exciting road ahead. I'm not sure if you're an engineering student or not, but I'm sure there's going to be money in a bill somewhere to finance. It's going to be financing the automotive industry, right, and electrification. So I think that future.
Yeah, in this jobs plan that the president just announced, there's how much is in there? $174 billion for electric vehicles, and it not only includes the rebates for the vehicles themselves, but also lots of money for the charging infrastructure, making it convenient to drive the car anywhere that you want. I think about my neighbor across the street. He had a Hummer H2, and then one day he brought home a Tesla Model S, and I saw it. I was like, that car is awesome. And he said, I just want you to know, I didn't get it because it's environmentally good. I got it because it's fast and it looks good. He did not vote for me.
We
But,
love our cars in
I said,
California.
hey, I said,
No,
whatever
I
works for
understand.
you, man, whatever works for you.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that was good discussion. So next up, we have a question from Gianna Peterson.
Hello, I'm Gianna. I'm from USD. And I have a question for either Representative Levin or Mayor Dedina. And I was just wondering if you could discuss or describe some of the potential infrastructure projects within the Tijuana River estuary that the 300 million from the new trade agreement will support, and how that will alleviate the environmental and public health issues that we're dealing with from the transboundary wastewater problem.
Mike, I can take that if you want.
Take it.
Sure. So, there's a number of projects. The big project is something that everybody kind of advocated, and that's what we call diversion infrastructure, basically a sort of a structure to capture these flows that cross the Tijuana River, so that, it'd be big enough to capture, I think it's 168 million gallons a day of flow that will reduce cross-border flow reaching the ocean to about 10 to 12 days a year. So it's really about what's happening now. Like right now, we've got 30 million gallons of sewage in that river pretty much every day all year. Last year, the same thing happened. So that sewage is captured. It's not related to rain. It's related to a pump station being off in Tijuana. And so that's the idea behind it. And that was a great example of people working together. I know Senator Ben Hueso and Assemblymember Todd Gloria, now the mayor of San Diego, had worked together to get money in the state budget that then went to the county of San Diego to do a study that came up with this recommendation. So it was a great example of people working together. In addition, there's been smaller projects, sedimentation basins that we put in canyons on the border as well to capture some of the trash and tires and sediment that keep flowing in, dirt basically that's filling in the Tijuana estuary, as well as some of the specific infrastructure that we've built in Mexico. So fixing pump stations, fixing collapsed pipes, and then really getting them to do, really the idea now is not just our money, but getting them to get public-private partnerships to reuse water. There's an Israeli company, ODIS, and they've recommended they're going to be building a water reuse plant. The reality is what Mexico is doing is huge problem with the Colorado River. So, we're sending water to Mexico under this treaty, very huge deal. They get this water, they're pumping it uphill using heavy fuel oil, right, to run their energy system, electrical grid, which causes huge emission problems in Mexicali and El Centro, big polluted area. They're pumping it uphill over the mountains to Tijuana. We're using it really inefficiently. It's leaking all over the place. And then they're dumping that sewage in the ocean, and there's a water crisis, right? So the idea is first of all, let's be a lot more efficient and reuse that water so we're not, just double pumping water everywhere. So that's the idea. I hope that helps. We've really focused on getting Mexico to address its need to take this issue responsibly. But one important thing is getting that money, that $300 million that Congressman Levin mentioned, that's going to the Border Wastewater Infrastructure Fund that's managed by the EPA and the North American Development Bank. They're the honest brokers that we have. They're great agencies. The North American Development Bank is a binational sort of like infrastructure bank. So they've been the ones that have been really good at working with Mexico and moving this process forward. The NAD Bank has been a godsend on the Mexican side and working with agencies. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Mayor, the thing I mentioned before, we got a notice today. The notice of intent, this is from the EPA Region 9, Notice of Intent for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement Mitigation of Contaminated Transboundary Flows Project was published in the Federal Register this morning. So that's what they have to do to get the environmental impact report going. And they said the scoping meeting will be held virtually on April 20th, and then a formal presentation, et cetera, comments due by May 20th.
Excellent.
So
that's great.
we're getting it going.
Thank you.
They have to do that. It's called bureaucracy, but they have to move forward with an environmental impact study. And
I know you were on the phone with the EPA recently, along with Scott Peters. I know that, talking to
we had a great discussion actually. And we're just going to keep at it. And if you know, again, if there's ever anything that you see or hear that we need to know about, that we need to help with, or push them along, or write a letter, or whatever, you know. But hopefully we're there, and we just got to go through the hoops.
Good, thank you.
All right, so we only have 2 more minutes for this portion. We could probably spare a couple more minutes. But we have a question that was in the chat, so that we think is really good, that we want to make sure that we ask you. So here it is. What misconceptions or persistent myths have been a major barrier for you?
Ooh. You want to go first, Serge?
No, well, you can. I started first last time.
I think the biggest challenge is, and I'm not trying to pick on the media here, but if you only watch cable news or only get your news from Facebook or Twitter, you would think that things are so fundamentally broken in Washington that we could not do anything. And, you know, the reality is it's just not so. So I would just encourage you to have a, you know, diversified media diet. And, you know, if you're getting most of your news via Facebook or Twitter, probably a bad idea. Turns out we've got one of the really excellent local newspapers, I'd say anywhere in the United States, in the UT. They do a fantastic job of covering our local issues. And when I'm in DC, I wake up and I go to the digital version of the UT rather than turning on, you know, MSNBC. I'm not picking on MSNBC. It's just, that's my opinion, because, you know, there is a, you know, look, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of polarization out there, but to the extent that we as members of Congress can interact with one another on a human level and get out from, you know, the bubble that you see on cable news, and just remember that most people are not watching cable news. You know, I think the better off we'll all be. The other thing is, you know, a lot of members of Congress would rather be on TV yelling and screaming rather than actually, you know, in the weeds, blocking and tackling and trying to get big things done for their districts. That's because it's much easier to go on TV and yell and scream. They invite me to go on TV and yell and scream. I don't do it. I won't do it. I will go on TV if relevant to our district. And, you know, some people, you know, perhaps that's disappointing to them, but that's where I'm at. So that would be the biggest misperception, is that things are really screwed up. Now, there are members that are really out there, out of whack, and, you know, some very dangerous things that we've seen most recently about the propagation of conspiracy theories and all kinds of nonsense. And that's a big problem. But that's the exception rather than the norm.
Yeah, I'll echo Congressman Levin's statement, or, you know, answer, and that is, you know, the issue of social media, and then what I call the daily Facebook crisis. You know, your local city is a daily you should get on Facebook right now. Things are falling apart. It's like, no, it's okay. There's 3 people that are really upset about something, and I'm just going to ignore it, you know. And the reality, I try to, you know, I post something on Facebook every day. I try to be positive and post information, and, you know, and then Twitter is more informational for people, you know, that are really more in office. But yeah, I think you really have to really focus on getting solid information out there and then communicating it effectively. And that's why misinformation can come back. And that's why, you know, if you've been at a meeting with 165 people and they're all mad about something that didn't happen and you're not doing, on people you've known your whole life, you know how important it is to do that. But more importantly, now what we talk about, this idea of meetings and communicating in small groups, because just the misinformation ecosystem travels at light speed, as Congressman Levin knows, since he dealt with it on January 6th. You know, we've all it's a challenge. All of us are being challenged on how we deal with this, right? And get information out and focus on solving problems, like you said, Mike. I think solving real problems and doing real things that make a difference, instead of just spending your time spinning your wheels, which, right, is easy and fun to do, right, I guess.
All right, great. So I got to keep us moving. We have one more student that we want to let ask that question because they're willing to be in our video. And that is Ashley Eckert. And we're going to have to do this in 2 minutes.
All right. Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm from the computer science group at UC San Diego. And my question is for Representative Levin. So this is going back to the electric vehicle situation you were talking about. So California is pushing for more electric vehicles. And I heard you mention that you were pushing for convenient charging stations. But these charging stations still generate their electricity through the burning of fossil fuels. So I guess my question is, what are we doing? Or is there any policy being discussed or talked about to make this process run on renewable energy so that we can actually reduce carbon as much as we possibly can, instead of charging these electric cars by burning more fossil fuels, still contributing to carbon, to carbon emissions. So
Yeah,
30 seconds each. Go.
No, Ashley, you're spot on. You have to look at the well-to-wheel analysis of any vehicle. And if you are using a grid that's powered by fossil electricity or fossil energy to get your electricity, you're going to have a terrible well-to-wheel analysis. You're not going to do much good. So California, you've got SB 100. We're on the path to 100% clean energy. We've said in the Build Back Better infrastructure plan that President Biden ran on, and our select committee report, select committee on the climate crisis report, that we want to get to 100% zero net carbon overall by 2050 in the power sector by 2040. So it has to work hand in glove. You're absolutely right. And that's where we need a whole lot more renewable electricity generation. And we need things like utility scale battery storage to be able to complement that intermittent generation. I give great credit to California for leading the way. It is going to be a great engineering challenge. So those of you that are interested in the future of the electric grid, you're going to not be for lack of career choices, because it is a grand experiment in converting. Mark Jacobson, professor at Stanford, talks about wind, water, solar, and it's easy. It's from an engineering perspective doable to get to around 80%, but then to get from 80 to 100% without baseload fossil is hard. And so that's where we need smart people like you, Ashley, to hopefully help to solve some of those challenges. What they're doing in the city of LA is pretty interesting, where they, believe it or not, they still have like 20% coal. The city of Los Angeles still relies on about 20% coal power. And so what they're going to do is repower the coal plant that they're in contract with in Utah using renewable hydrogen generated from electrolysis, from using renewable electricity to split water. Now, it's not something that's been done at that scale before, but we have to think outside of the box. And we have to build a lot more utility scale storage and put a lot more renewables on the grid.
Thank you. Whew, sorry to rush us all through that. Wish we could talk more on that topic because it's a good one. But now we have to respect everyone's time and bring this to an end.